book. So we're collecting business cards. I'm going to raffle off John's book, Everyone Communicates If You Connect. And I am in there on the back page. It says, at least I was, yeah. What's interesting with this is that this was written by, on page 254 at the bottom, William Eickhoff. He wrote this one on the internet, and he'd post a chapter, and he'd ask everybody to contribute to it. So, very interesting. So we'll raffle that off at the end. All right, moving right along. The law of process. One of my favorite laws. The law of process says leadership develops daily, not in a day. See, the opposite of process is an event. This is an event right here. Now, if we fill in the blanks here, I'm going to say the event and then the process. So number one is the tendency is we overestimate the event. We overestimate that value. And we underestimate the process. So overestimate and underestimate. Now, an event encourages decisions, and a process encourages development. An event challenges people, whereas a process changes people. Number four, an event is a calendar issue. Where a process is a cultural issue. The event motivates people. A process matures people. An event is easy, and the process is difficult. So I hope you're starting to get a vision in your mind about what we're talking about here. I've been to a lot of events that have excited me, gotten me fired up. 3 weeks later, I can barely remember the event that I went to. So here's a reality check. You're not going to leave here today as leaders. Now, I'd like to talk about something from Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich. How many people have heard of Napoleon Hill? And how many people have read Think and Grow Rich? Okay. Published in 1937, around the same time that Dale Carnegie did How to Win Friends and Influence People. Think and Grow Rich is the number 6 all-time bestseller business book on Business Week. Might want to look into this book. The background from this book is that Napoleon Hill was a journalist just getting started in his career, and he was blessed to be able to shadow Andrew Carnegie for 3 days. Now, Andrew Carnegie is different from Dale Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie is a Scottish multi-millionaire at the turn of the century that owned steel companies. And it's said that in today's equivalent dollars, he's wealthier than Bill Gates. And if you stop and think, the Industrial Revolution, what fed and fueled the Industrial Revolution was steel. Steel for the railroads, steel for the locomotive engines, for the skyscrapers that built this country. Whereas with Bill Gates, his company has fed this information age that we're living in. Andrew Carnegie was so impressed with Napoleon Hill that he commissioned him to study 500 of the most successful people that he knew, that he had in his Rolodex. And he challenged Napoleon Hill to write a book about what successful people do. And that's this Think and Grow Rich. So essentially, Andrew Carnegie said, here's my Rolodex, have at it. So for the next 20 years, he studied people like Thomas Edison. I mean, he met with Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and the Rockefellers Alexander Graham Bell. He interviewed 4 sitting presidents. And he came up with 14 principles. Now, the 9th principle, which is the one that he felt was really significant, is he found out that whenever these guys were faced with a decision or an opportunity or a challenge, they'd meet with the sharpest people they knew to discuss that issue. So they had people of the same mind working together. And he said it was almost magical that a third mind appeared when everybody came together to massage a challenge or an opportunity. And this, he said it's like if you had one battery and then you put it in series with several more batteries, you got more power out of it. And that's what we teach when we teach leadership, is we do it in a mastermind format. So I teach the 21 Laws of Leadership in a 10-week program. We meet for an hour a week, and a good mastermind for me is if I do 15% of the talking. The responsibility of the participants is to read the book, and we just hit the tops of the wave about those 3 chapters. But the power comes from massaging the issues that come up with the experience of the people around the table. And I purposely load these people that are with people that are influential. I want people that have had life experiences. And after about the 4th week, you start to see this mind, this magical mind. I almost sound New Age with this stuff, but the power of everybody focusing on a problem or a challenge, and the challenge is leadership. So there'll be an opportunity later on. You all should have something on your table that talks about these masterminds. So the secret of our success is found in our daily agenda, which just so happens John wrote a book called Today Matters. And he talks about the 12 things that he does every day. Stephen Covey talks about it in his book, and it's called The Law of Fives. If you need to cut down a tree, you can just keep chopping at it until it falls. Or if you just were to take 5 chops every day, 365 days a year, you're going to take 5 chops at one point in time when that tree is going to fall over. But that's what he's talking about as it translates into personal growth. And we've touched on personal growth already, that when we look at an athlete or musician, they have to get better than the day before. And John so happens to have written a book called The 15 Laws of Personal Growth that'll be coming out in July. Now, the law of process is the lid lifter. Now, I sense the energy is draining out of the room, so I'll tell you a little story again. Did you ever wonder how dentists learn to give injections? I went to University of Michigan Dental School, and tell you the truth, I never thought about that either. The format for dental school is same in medical school. You have an hour of lecture, and then you go to clinic for 3 hours, and you practice what you learned in the first hour during the next 3 hours. So they turn us loose on patients, and then eventually you're going to anesthetize a patient. So my roommate Mike and I were notorious for blowing into class at about 7:59, and we always get the last 2 chairs on the top row. And Jack's smiling here because he probably knows where this is going. Well, a lot of it is audiovisual. So we're up in Michigan. It's cold in the wintertime, and I got my down jacket on and no coffee. And they start lecturing, and they turn the lights out. And within 5 minutes, I'm out. Now, you know when you wake up and there's drool all over the desk and everything? I am sawing some Z's. And I look over, and Mike, I have to wake Mike up. And just as we wake up, the instructor says, all right, we'll meet in clinic where we'll practice giving injections. Well, I'm not too worried about this. I mean, my sister's an RN, and I'd seen her injecting oranges. You know, they teach diabetics to give injections with oranges. So, you know, it's the winter time. It's orange season down here in Florida. You know, I walk into clinic. There's 120 students, so there's pairs of us. Mike and I shared a cubicle, and so there's 60 cubicles, and I'm expecting to see a cornucopia of oranges all over the place, and smelling the orange blossoms and everything, and there's no oranges there. The instructor brings everybody together. He says, now remember, what we did, that we talked about this morning, you're going to break up into pairs, and you're going to practice giving injections. And everybody leaves, and I said to the instructor, where are all the patients? He said, weren't you awake during the seminar? He says, you're the patient. He said, you think we can get anybody to volunteer to have you stick them for the first time? So the protocol is that the instructor says, now remember, you're going to inject your partner, I'll watch your technique, and then I'll come back in a little bit, and I'm going to stick you in the lip with a needle. And if the Novocaine didn't take, we'll do it over again. So I'm walking back with Mike, and I said, were you awake during this thing? Said, no, I thought you were awake. It was your turn. I said, all right. I said, we are not doing this over again. No matter what happens, it works. So I figured I'll volunteer first and get this over with. So unbeknownst to me, I volunteered for the most painful injection in dentistry, which is right underneath the nose. So instructor comes over, and Mike pulls out the syringe, and instructor's watching him. And so here's Mike coming at me, and his hand's shaking. And now I know that he's been sleeping through this. And I'm trying to get in front of him because he's got to hit a certain area. The needle's got to go in at a certain point. So the instructor's watching, and whew, he hits the right point. But it hurt like crazy. So now he starts injecting. Into my horror, the anesthetic is coming up my nose. And I'm whispering underneath my breath, Mike, you went too far. And he's whispering back, shut up. So I know the instructor's seeing this. So the instructor, Mike puts the syringe down, and he's injected 2 cc's of xylocaine into the air. And the instructor says, all right, we'll be back to check this out. Now, I'm sitting there, and Mike's going, well, how's that feel? I said, well, how the hell do you think it feels? It hurt, and I'm still not numb. The instructor comes back. He says, how's that feeling? And he's unsheathing a new needle as he's talking. I said, oh, man, this thing is so swollen. My face feels out to here. I don't really think we need to check this. It's numb. He said, let me be the judge of it. So he jabs me in the lip. Now, do you think I'm going to jump or move so Mike can do this again? I said, didn't feel anything. So now the tables are reversed. So instructor leaves and comes back. Now he's over my shoulder as I'm injecting Mike. And Mike, I'm going to do an inferior alveolar, which is a little more complicated because you have to find an anatomical landmark. And so you have to put your thumb behind the hinge of the ear and pull your lip back. I'm sure everybody's experienced that. So Mike knows that I've been falling asleep, and the instructor's watching. So I hit my mark. I'm right where I need to be. But I don't know how far I'm supposed to stick the needle in. Now, all of a sudden, I feel something in my thumb. Now, I can't jump back and go, geez, with the instructor watching. So I inject 2 cc's into my thumb. So the instructor says, okay. Now, Mike doesn't know this. So he's sitting there, and I'm playing along. He said, is that feeling numb yet? He said, no, not really. And just as the instructor comes up and unsheaths the needle, Mike sees me going like this. And so he's coming at Mike, and Mike is realizing that if he jumps, I'm going to have to give another injection with a numb hand. So he sticks Mike in the lip. Mike doesn't move. So I guess the moral of the story is that's a process because it's 40 years later and I'm still in practice and I can give a pretty painless injection, but there was a process that I had to go through. And as you go through life, as you do your growth, the tendency is to look at the immediate thing of what's happening that day and not realizing that this is going to be a process. I'm not the dentist that I was when I started out, fortunately. So the law of the process is the lid lifter. Now, we touched on this law of solid ground, which is page 14. Now, once again, trust is the foundation of leadership. Number one, these are the 3 questions that followers ask leaders. Can I trust you? Can you help me? And do you care about me? Trust is the most important thing. So to build trust, you must demonstrate consistent competence. but you also need to build trust by demonstrating consistent character. Let me use a visual demonstration of this law of trust. When you're hired into an organization, there's a perception that you're a trustful person. So they're going to cut you some slack. And as you go through your career, you're either going to be making deposits into that bank of goodwill or making withdrawals out of that bank of goodwill. So, Bob, let me use an example here. Trust is sort of like having change in your pocket. Okay? Now, let's pretend Bob is my direct report and a situation develops where the report wasn't done on time. And so I'm obfuscating and I've got an excuse for that. Well, I've got to give him some change out of my pocket, but it's okay. Still got change. So in going along, another situation develops that I'm working with a coworker, and the coworker says to you, did you do this and you do that? And, no, I'm going to get around to it. And they keep coming back and asking. And so finally she goes to your direct report and says, I don't know, this guy isn't very dependable. Well, more change out of my pocket, but it's okay. Still got change. So, the problem is that with this law process that we talked before, you build trust over time or you lose trust over the time. So I'm already on shaky ground. They've been cutting me some slack, but another situation occurs. More change out of my pocket. Now I'm onto my credit card. Now here's the problem. I had change before, but I got no change now. This is a picture of a leader in trouble. I don't have change in my pockets anymore. I'm going to probably have to leave the organization. But let's assume that they cut me some slack and I start, making an effort to change. And so I do something that gets a good response from my direct report, so he gives me.
Not working that hard yet.
Wait, okay, so I gave him almost $200. I got $20 now. And that, we didn't rehearse this much, but he didn't give me the 100 that I gave him. So that's the problem, is it's hard to regain that trust. So we continue on, and I'm being more consistent with my character, and I'm showing competence, so he gives me some more change, another 20. It takes time to rebuild trust. It doesn't happen overnight, and this is the law that has the severest consequences when you break it. So finally, I get back into his good graces, and I get all back again. Thank you, Robert. So visually, that's what we're talking about here, is that a leader wants to have change in his pocket. With change in your pocket, you want to be walking around with your pants pockets just loaded with change. And when you walk into a room, if you're having trouble with people, it's because you don't have too much change left in your pockets. Because guaranteed, if you want to change an organization, you better have change in your pocket. So it's disheartening to see what's going on in this country as far as this loss of trust. We saw a prime example last week at the Honda Classic. Tiger Woods, he had the law of momentum behind him. Momentum is a leader's best friend. He could do no wrong. But you see what happens when you break that law of solid ground? The only reason he was over at the Honda Classic is because Buick dropped his endorsement. I mean, that was the biggest challenge at the Honda Classic. Everybody's saying, wow, when are you going to get Tiger Woods there? And it wasn't going to happen because his biggest endorsement was Buick. He lost it like that. You lose momentum. This law has the biggest consequences when you break this law. And in our society, I mean, the mention of Anthony Weeder and Joe Paterno, that just happened within the last 6 months or so. It's every time you turn around, there's some break in the trust that people have. And, you know, we all know the cliches. This is a law that's a cliche. It's, honesty is the best policy. I mean, these are things that we were raised as kids with. The challenge in our culture is that greed has entered the picture. Anything can be justified because of the money that's involved with us. You look at our the amount of advertising and media coverage of the Kardashian sisters, no wonder why the Middle East hates us. That's what we're starting to stand for. So one of the reasons I'm passionate about leadership is because I think that it can make a difference in this world. So dropping down to the middle of page 14, trust is like change in your pocket. You can't make changes in the organization without change in your pocket. Breaking this law carries the biggest consequences. And here's some questions to ask yourself. Do I have change in my pocket? Is my change increasing or decreasing? Okay, next law is the law of magnetism. Another one of my favorite laws. Law of magnetism says who you are is who you attract. This is a challenge for you. Write down 3 qualities you are looking for in an employee that you would like to attract. So here's the question. Do you possess those 3 qualities? That's the law of magnetism. Who you are is who you attract. You attract who you are and not who you want. So you will only attract those people if you possess these qualities. Do you? So here's some key areas of attraction. Number 1 is your mission. What your business or organization is about is going to attract people. Number 2 is your priorities. Number 3 is your age. And what we see with this is you'll start to see organizations reflective of people's ages, especially with some of the newer business models out there like Google and Facebook. Number 4 is values. What you stand for is going to attract a certain type of person. Your background is number 5. Number 6 is your attitude. And number 7 is your strengths. Now, I'd like to take some time this morning to digress about a book called Strengths Finders. Strengths Finders 2.0. Anybody familiar with that, with this book? This book will blow you away. Donald Clifton wrote the first edition of this. Now, he's known as the godfather of positive psychology. He set the psychology world on its ear because I think everybody in college liked Psychology 101 because you got to study all the crazy people. Very popular class. Well, he raised the question, we've been studying all these sick people. Nobody's getting better. He said, what if we studied habits of healthy people and took these people that aren't doing too well and said, look, act like these people. So that was the introduction to positive psychology. Now, he took that one step further, and he partnered with the Gallup company, and they put together an online survey that comes with the book. Now, what you end up with is he identified 34 talents that people are born with. And this test will give you your top 5 strengths or talents. Now, I'm a maximizer. I'm an arranger. I believe in connectedness. I'm strong in belief and responsibility. Those are my top 5 strengths. If I told you I was bipolar or obsessive compulsive, everybody got it. So the whole spin is that you want to play to your strengths. And that's what we're talking about here with this law of magnetism. Because typically here's what happens in an organization. You have quarterly reviews and they bring you in and they say, well, you're good here and you're good here, but really weak over here. So it might be maybe you're not too good at customer service. So the corporation in its wisdom is going to send you to school and you're going to learn customer service. And we're going to give you some phrases to use. If they say this, you say that. So now you got karaoke empathy. The reality is that you're not going to get better in your weaknesses. You're only going to get better in your strengths. You reach a point of diminishing returns when you're trying to make yourself strong in an area that you're weak. Now, the book will give you a code in the back. You go online. You get to take this. You read the first chapter because it just kind of rehashes what I talked about. But you take the test and with the code in the back of the book, which is genius because I can't say, hey, Jack, you got to read this book. It's great, because he can't use the code again. So you got to buy another book. But this is a whole revolution now because Donald Clifton partnered with Marcus Buckingham, and they came up with the Strengths Revolution. Now, what I found for myself that it was very liberating for myself, because what a maximizer is he likes to take something from good to great. Don't ask me to raise something from the dead, either an individual or a project. Give me a project that's already working pretty well, and I can take it to the next level, because that's just the way I'm wired. Now, the challenge is with your kids. That if your kid comes home and he's got 4 A's and a D, where are you going to spend the time? On the D. We're going to hire the finest tutors, and we're going to encourage them and work with them and everything. The reality is that that's about as good as it gets with him. He's never going to get better than a D. The challenge is that you can't say that to your kid. But we carry that attitude forward in life, though, that we're always trying to fix something on somebody instead of finding out what they're good at and helping them as an employer, putting them in a position of their strength. Because going forward, you want to take people out of their comfort zone, but you never want to take them out of their strength zone, which goes back to that can't and won't. If you're putting somebody out of their strength zone, you're asking them to do something they just can't do, and it's frustrating for them. And you get frustrated with them. It's like trying to teach a pig to sing. You're both going to be frustrated. Is that striking a chord here? Have you ever heard of this concept before? So on my team, at the office, did strength. Whenever I'm working with people, I always want to find out what their strengths are. You've heard of DISC and Myers-Briggs, but this is the only one that I've ever seen that really, this really nails people. And the rest of the book, so you read the first chapter, you take the test and find out what your strengths are. The rest of the book is 34 chapters highlighting what each strength looks like and how do you work with somebody like that. So on my team at work, I've got 3 people that exhibit empathy and harmony. Now, it sounds like Ebony and Ivory, the song, and then the girls all think they're wimpy strengths. But if you stop to think, people don't like to be at the dentist's office, and it's a scary, frightening place. And what better place to have people that have empathy and harmony? Now, Some of this stuff self-selects. Obviously, people that go into the healing professions have some of this empathy and harmony. And I guess I intuitively attracted those people to my practice. But we're talking about strength finders for magnetism. Because here's the problem with this, is that if you're not careful, you're going to attract people to your team that have the same strengths as you. So we talked about our key areas of attraction. So David Sprague, who can't be here today, his daughter's in the emergency room at the hospital. He's not here, so I can talk about him. David is a brilliant IT guy, brilliant, but not strong on the people skills. He's a cut-to-the-chase type of guy. Now, he's got 5 people on his team. They're all the same as him. They get together. It's high fives. They're having a great time. So they hired a female HR director. They don't understand her at all. But you have to be strategic. Once you become aware of this law of magnetism, you better be strategic about it, because you're going to end up with a team that just looks like you. So there's strength in that. You know, there's advantages to that, but there's disadvantages, because you don't want to develop blind spots on your team. Now, taking that one step further, in the 1980s, management was the buzzword. You had Ken Blanchard with, I think it was the 3-Minute Manager or something like that. And every book was written on management. Well, what a manager does is he maintains the status quo. The problem is when the technology started exploding, things started changing too fast. Couldn't manage it anymore. So the emphasis went to leadership. So all the books in the 90s were about leadership. And now it's evolved into team leadership. And it's evolved into team leadership because of this book, The 21 Laws. You see, the best you can hope for is maybe be good on 5 of these 21 laws. So if you need a team, because 1 is too insignificant a number to create anything big, then you're going to need a team. Well, if you know what your strengths are, and then if you know what your strengths are in these laws, then you might better recruit somebody on your team that complements your weakness. Because that's one of the things that they teach you, and this is coping strategies. If you do have a weakness, what can you do about it? Well, you can surround yourself with people that are strong in your weakness. So John's always talking about he's strong on, he's a maximizer and he gets fired people up, but he's weak on navigation. And in one of my classes last week, I had, one of the guys that's in it is the former operations director for Christ Fellowship when it started exploding. Now, Pastor Mullins is a former football coach, and he'll get you fired up. He'll get you ready to charge the gates of hell with a water pistol. But the strategy to get there, he's not strong on. And so the guy that's in my class with me for 8 years was his navigator. That he'd deal with, they'd meet in meetings and say, okay, this is where you want to go, Tom, but we got to fill in the back end here. How are we going to get there? And so he's had to surround him. Leaders, strong leaders that put together a team are going to consciously attract people that they know they're aware of this law of magnetism, and they got to be careful, or they're going to end up with people that are just like them. Everybody's strategic, everybody's focused, but they're low on maybe the law of connection, the ability to relate to people. Is that making sense? Okay, so like begets like, the bottom of the page. If you wouldn't follow yourself, why would anyone else? And the Strength Finders 2.0 is the second edition of the Strength Finders concept.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
When you mentioned something about people, having empathy and caring and such, what happens in a business environment? Mine is an entirely different background, but anyway, you see when people become callous in that respect because they've done it so long. How do you get them back to square one and get them back on the team?
Well, whose responsibility do you think that is?
The
Leader. Goes back to connecting with them again, which is going to be one of the laws that we talk about here. You need to be able to be in relationship with somebody that you can confront them. Because this is the thing that we're talking about here is, I lost my pen somewhere. Hang on a second. Somebody steal my pen. What John talks about is a concept called care and candor. Care versus candor. Now, this is one of the hardest things about leadership, because care values the relationship. Candor values the person's potential. Tendency for most people is to err on the side of caring, that you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, don't want to make any waves. And then there's leaders that err on the side of my way or the highway, and I'm just going to call you on it. And that's this balance of caring about the relationship and then the candor about you could be doing better. I see potential in you. And you know, I don't understand why this is going on. And I can see how you get beat up by life. Maybe those people need a break from frontline to catch their breath, because it goes back to this attitude of can't and won't. That are they capable of being on the front line? Because a lot of times when you start a business, you just start it with anybody for what you start out with. Like my son-in-law, where I hold the mastermind groups up in Jupiter, his office, he runs a family business. They deal with high net worth individuals, and they manage everything about their finances and insurance and their giving. And he started out with 5 people. 3 of them are gone now. So it goes back to that issue of can't or won't. That, okay, this person is getting a little callous about customer service. It's an attitude. Can he change that or not? I don't know if that answers your question or not. Okay. All right, moving along here. Law of addition, page 16. Leaders add value by serving others. This is a servanthood issue. Now, this sets the whole idea of leadership on its ear, because most people think of leadership as, I'm entitled to these perks. That's why I want to be a leader. I want to get that corner office. I want to get the good parking spot. And leadership is very visual. Now, John used to be a pastor out in California, and they were landlocked. They couldn't expand any. So on Sundays, they had to borrow people's parking lots of offices in the area. And as the lead pastor of a church of 5,000 people, he should be able to park right next door. You know, get the best choice spot, because he's the leader. Well, he made an announcement to all the volunteers that, look, we need to leave the choice parking spots for people that are coming to church for the first time. And he would get there for a 9 o'clock service. He'd get there at 6:30. Now, nobody's there. He could park anywhere he wants, but he intentionally parked 3 blocks from where he could have parked to lead by example. And that's another cliche. Lead by example. So this servanthood issue is when you start looking throughout history at the examples of servanthood, you're always going to find examples of it. One of the people that he talks about in the book is Mother Teresa. That this was a woman that gained great influence, but it was because of her servanthood attitude. You know, presidents and heads of countries listened to her. But she achieved that level of influence by serving others. So, we add value when we truly value others. Number 2, we make ourselves more valuable to others. That's how we add value. Number 3, we know and relate to what others value. And number 4, we do things that God values. So, massaging this concept a little bit about adding value. Nancy, my hygienist daughter, is applying to hygiene school. So she starts next year, and so she works in our office part-time. And she's a gopher, and we're teaching her dental assisting, but I'm actually taking the time to teach her simple things like you want to have simple things like you want to have a finger rest when you're doing something delicate. Instead of me working out here, I always want to hold my finger on something to balance it. So she'll be sitting in the chair while I'm doing something delicate that I'm actually holding one finger against the other to steady my hands, and I'm holding my hands against the side of my chest here. And it's something I'm doing, I'm unconsciously competent in it, but I'm actually stopping and explaining this to her because I realize that I'm adding value to her, because when she goes on and she goes to hygiene school, she's going to have a leg up on everybody else there, but then going out into the workplace, I don't know about your business, but things have changed since 2008. We're multitasking now, so we would probably want to hire somebody that can clean teeth, but sometimes we're not busy enough and we don't have enough patience. Well, it'd be nice if that person could assist me. So I've made herself more valuable by showing her these things so that she can take that forward in life. And that's an example from my perspective of how I can add value to somebody, is being strategic about this, because in the process, she's become a more valuable employee to me. She can do a better job while she's here. So questions, once again, questions followers ask leaders again. Can I trust you? Can you help me? And do you care about me? So the second question, can you help me? It's about adding value to people. Are people better off for having worked for you or having been led by you? Because here's the interesting thing. Back to this law of solid ground. With time, with integrity, over time, things get better. Without integrity, over time, things get worse. So relationships are built on listening and caring. We add value to others when we truly value others. And I think everybody has Ernest Hemingway used to call it a crap detector, that you can tell when they're not being sincere with you. And that's this thing about, do you care about me? Are you just going through the motions here? Or do you really care about me? The worst thing you can do is ask a question and then not listen. Is it getting hot in here? Or is it just me? Okay. So make a list of the areas where you are more valuable than you were 5 to 10 years ago. Because this is a growth issue. Now we've touched on this before about personal growth. There are people who say, I've got 10 years experience doing this. Well, the reality is they've had 1 year experience and they've done it 10 times. The hope would be that you could look back on where you are now and maybe you're a little bit better than when you started out. So our question is, are you making things better for people that are following you? And the bottom line in leadership is not how far we advance ourselves, but how far we advance others. Let me just talk a little bit about leaders and the Strength Finders issue again. Because what the Strength Finders helps a leader to do is to identify where that person's strengths are. So it sounds like I'm beating up managers. I'm not. But it's just to, you want to create a managing leader, not just a manager, because managers play chess. Or rather, I'm taking that back. Managers play checkers, and leaders play chess. Okay, so what the devil does that mean? What do checkered pieces all have in common? They all move the same way. Now, chess, every piece moves differently. And that's what we're trying to illustrate with adding value to people. It doesn't help if you add value to people in an area that it can't help them. And most likely, you're going to have the best success adding value to them when you're focusing on their strengths. So that is from the book Strength Finders. There's about 4 or 5 of them that they've written since then, the variations on that. The idea that a leader is going to be playing checkers with his people. Now, I think we're coming to the end of the laws that we're going to cover today. And this is the law of connection, which is my favorite law. They've probably been my favorite law here today. Leaders touch a heart before they ask for a hand. Relationship is leadership. People who won't go along with you if they can't get along with you. Now that's that book that we're going to raffle off here today, which is Everyone Communicates But Few Connect. Another dental story. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, when the Vietnam War was winding down, churches were sponsoring Vietnamese families to come into the States. So Faith Lutheran over here on US 1 was sponsoring a Vietnamese family, and they asked me if I could take care of the family. So there was a language barrier. So that language barrier doesn't translate too well into dentistry. You know, like I've been on several trips to Mexico, and my Spanish consists of over la boca and cierra la boca, which is open your mouth and close your mouth. And then you pick up some lingo like mucho and grande, stuff like that. So at the end of the week that I'm down there, I'm saying Sierra La Boca Grande, and the translator's going, no, you don't want to say that. I said, why not? He said, you just told her to shut her big fat mouth. So I've got this patient in there. Obviously, you can imagine how scary it is going to the dentist in a foreign country, and he's saying stuff to you, and it's just like blah, 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 blah. So I remembered that Debbie Schumann had brought in this guy. And so I went out to the lobby and said, Debbie, can you speak to this guy? I'm having trouble communicating with him. She said, yeah, I got it. So she comes in, and I said, Debbie, I want you to tell him to open his mouth. She goes, open your mouth. So everybody communicates, but not everybody connects. That was a good one. That's usually what we do, is we speak slower. When they don't understand us, we speak slower and louder, but that's not connecting. Now, the example that John likes to use for this connection is when he was growing up in Indiana, there was a train yard where he grew up, and they could sit on the hill and watch the trains hook up. So the locomotive would back up, and as the locomotive backed up, it would bump into the connector, and then it would go past the connection, and then it would pull apart and make the connection. And so he uses that example to illustrate that the responsibility of the leader is to go to the person. So the train had to get on the right track, and then it had to move towards the boxcar, and then it had to actually make contact with the boxcar before it could actually connect. So I don't know if that visual helps you with this, because the tendency is for the leader to be in his ivory tower, and people are intimidated about talking to him. In fact, one of the examples in the law of solid ground is there's a story about a leader that said to his people, listen, this is my cell phone number. If anybody ever asks you to do something that you feel uncomfortable with or you think is unethical, I want you to call me on it. Now, what kind of a statement is he making about his values for solid ground? But he's also encouraging the people to come to him. He's making himself available. So do you make yourself available to your people? The concept is walking slowly through the crowd. Now, when John Maxwell moved to town, he confided in me that he wanted to have an outreach to the business community, and not just an outreach to the Christian business community. So we started something called Impact Leadership Network, where we'd bring in world-class speakers, and we met down at the convention center 6 times a year, and John would come in and speak. And he does have some groupies that follow him around. You know, he's like a rock star. So I'm trying. You know, we're on a schedule, and I got to get him up to the front to speak. And it's like I'm like the bodyguard, you know, trying to keep everybody away. And finally, John turns around and says, "Bill, walk slowly through the crowd." And he drives people nuts because he's the real deal. He'll take 20 minutes, 30 minutes to get up to the front where he's going to speak, and everybody's looking at there and watching. Oh, we got to get going here, and he's just laughing and autographing books and just having a great old time. But I've been around him long enough to realize that he's the real deal. He has this ability to connect with people that he just doesn't write about in a book. I mean, this guy is, you know, he's a patient of mine. I've known him for going on 20 years now. He hasn't changed. It's encouraging to see something like that. Now, with this law of connection again, back to when I drew out the form there, I've got to connect with my patients. I bought into that early on in the game. The challenge when you come out of school is I know how to fix a tooth. I can make that tooth look pretty. I can straighten that tooth out. I can take that tooth out. But I had to get customers. Now, I come out of an ivory tower attitude that this is the best, you've been trained to do the best dentistry possible, and I would present that to a client, and they'd say, well, let me think about it, which is a polite way of saying, no. And after a while, I got tired of people saying no to me, so much so I just stopped presenting better dentistry because I knew they were going to say no. And, you know, bills needed to get paid, kids are getting born, and I'm struggling. And that's how I gravitated into this personal growth, Dale Carnegie, John Maxwell stuff. Is I had to figure out a way how I was going to make a living, and it's not going to more classes on how to fix teeth. You know, I've got all these skills on the shelf. I got to get people to stay in the office. So I had to learn how to relate and connect with people and build rapport with them. I had to learn that it was okay for somebody to say no to me, that was still okay. But here's the challenge with this stuff is that if I never presented dentistry, then it would never get done. So what I tell patients now is that, look, I think you're entitled to know what the ideal dentistry is. Whether you want to do that or not, that's up to you. Maybe it's a question of timing. You know, usually it's a question of timing, not so much as the money. They may want to do it, but they got kids in private schools. They've got a wedding coming up. They're saving for college education for the kids, and most parents are going to put that by the wayside. So my goal is to keep that patient in my practice through rapport. Because the worst thing I can do is say, well, you need to do this stuff, and then sneer at them when they say no. Well, they're gone. Never coming back. And over the, you know, what I found through the law of process is these people eventually get the stuff done. They just show up one day and they say, okay, I'm ready to go. I said, do what? Because I forgot what I told them that they should do. And if you've been doing this law of process, that happens every day now because I've been in practice long enough. And I think that relates to what some of the stuff that you guys are doing here. So, how do you connect? Number one, you connect with people first. I'm sorry, you connect with yourself first. What do you think that means, connect with yourself first? Very good. Being comfortable in your own skin. Any other observations about that, knowing yourself?
You know what your limitations are, what your weaknesses and your strengths.
Right. Because you can't give what you don't have. Number two, communicate with openness and sincerity. Number three is know your audience. And that goes back to what I was talking about with John. There was a method to his madness about walking slowly through the crowd. He's getting a read on the crowd. You know, what the energy is in the room, maybe questions that they're asking, comments that they're making, because he's learned to be able to give a presentation on the fly. He's been known to change the presentation as he gets up on the stage based on what he's read from knowing his audience. And, you know, back to my practice, that I had to get to know these people. That is my audience. Number four, Live your message. Or walk the talk. Number 5 is go to where they are. Number 6 is focus on them, not yourself. Number 7 is believe in them. And number 8 is offer direction and hope. Now, we saw an example of George W. Bush with his ability to connect after 9/11. Everybody remembers him down on the floor where the World Trade Center was, and he's got a bullhorn, and he's yelling into that police chief's ear with the bullhorn. But he was connecting with the people there. Now you contrast that with Hurricane Katrina. Here's how Bush is connecting with them. Looking out the window. So you see good and bad people, and a lot of times with these laws, the examples that John uses are bad examples. So I always tell people, if you failed in life, don't feel bad. You can always be a bad example. All right, page 18. To lead yourself, use your head. To lead others, use your heart. Leaders must balance care with candor. Care values the relationship, while candor values their potential. Managers play checkers and leaders play chess. Now these questions were, winding it up here, these questions were taken from the Eli Lilly Corporation. Make a list of the people on your team. Now for each one, determine how well you know them by answering these questions. What 3 non-business things do you know about this person? Number 2, what does this person value? What are this person's top 3 concerns? Number 4, what does this person want or hope for in this life? Now, time doesn't permit me to cover any more laws here today, but I'd like to open this up to a question and answer if you have any questions about these laws, or maybe an observation of when that law has worked for you or it didn't work for you. About this law of solid ground here, has anybody worked for somebody that maybe the solid ground wasn't there?
Sure, we all have. Who's going to tell you about it?
In one of my mastermind groups, I found that my master groups are better when women participate in them. Demonstrated is what John calls 360-degree leadership, and which he happened to write a book about. The idea is that you lead up, down, and around. You can have, leadership is influence. You were able to influence her attitude and behavior towards you, and there's power in that.
Colleagues. There was a time when I was the CEO of a nonprofit organization that helped battered women, and I deliberately distanced myself emotionally because I didn't want to kind of get sucked into that world. And I was there for a little over 5 years, and it fried me. I mean, burnt me out horribly. The thing that I realized that I missed, which is what this work teaches, is that the compassion coupled with the candor not only makes them a better worker, but it makes me a better leader. And in the 8 or 9 years since I've left that organization, I completely shifted. I mean, 1 360 here was a 180. And I've in the other direction, and have found as a result of that, I have a lot more support from the people that I work with because I show that compassion, the candor, the care, and I want to understand them better. So you have to be more personal to be a leader, I think. And early on in my career, I never made that connection. I thought I had to keep my distance from people, ivory tower, if you will, in order to be a successful leader. And it just backfired.
And that's the way they used to teach leadership, that you needed to remain aloof. And the reality is if you connect with people, you're going to get hurt. And the tendency with some people is pull away from that, because that's probably was your experience in the beginning. Ooh, this is painful here, because I pour my heart into these people and I just stomp on it. Yeah. But if you want to be a leader, when we have these certification programs to become certified as a Maxwell trainer, John lets his hair down, and he says he's got one book for sure he knows it's still in him, but it's not going to come out until he dies, and that's Leadership Sucks.
But this is wonderful. I've really enjoyed your presentation.
Well, thank you.
And I've learned a lot. What's interesting to me and kind of humorous is I read the biography on Steve Jobs, and he contradicts everything. Everything. He was a terrible human being, terrible leader, yet he contributed a lot to society. So that's an exception to the rule or to the law. But I can't understand how that man got so far and did so much, contradicting everything that is presented, here, and other experts who say this is what a good leader is. He was certainly not a good leader. He wasn't even a good human being.
No.
It's amazing.
Yeah. There's been a lot that's been written about him, especially afterwards, because, look at how he changed the world. But he's like the Henry Fords, the Thomas Edisons. I mean, Thomas Edison was deaf, and Henry Ford offered to buy him the finest hearing aid available. Thomas Edison said, what do I want that for? I got to listen to everybody then. And Henry Ford, they use him for the example of empowerment. And his attitude was, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. And that's why General Motors and Dodge and Chrysler came on the picture, because they started giving the customer what they wanted. And so the engineers were frustrated at Ford, and they came out with a model, I get them confused, I think it's you probably know more, Model A was the second car. And they surprised him. He came out to the garage and they pulled the sheet off and he saw this thing. And he literally tore the car apart with a sledgehammer, ripped the doors off and everything. So those people are the exception to the rule. I mean, they said, I was reading one blog where the guy said, they said that Stephen Jobs in the last 6 months of his life spent it with an autobiographer because he wanted his kids to know who their father was. And the guy's comment was, he should have probably worked on iDad instead of the iPad. But they're still with, these guys are dichotomies, because if you ever want to read something or listen to something inspirational, he did the commencement exercise at Stanford. And if you Google Stephen Jobs' commencement speech, you can catch it. Well, what happened is that when he was up for adoption, the adoption was delayed because his mother was a grad student, and these were blue-collar workers that were adopting her child, and she wanted assurances that he would be educated. And so the parents agreed to it, and they scrimped and saved, and Steve Jobs said he went to college, and he dropped in and he dropped out. He wasn't getting anything from college, and he couldn't see his parents wasting that money on him. But then he dropped in. So he dropped in, dropped out, and then he dropped in again. And he made an arrangement with the dean that he could audit classes, and one of the classes that he audited was calligraphy. Now fast forward to Apple and Macintosh and everything. If Microsoft had anything to say with fonts, it'd just be like a typewriter. Got capital letters and smaller case letters. For one reason or another, Jobs was fascinated with calligraphy, and that's why you have all the different fonts on the Apple. And so what he said in his commencement exercise is that as you go through life and you follow your heart, you'll follow the dots. But you won't be able to connect those dots until you look back at your life. And, this is, looking around the room, most of the people are over age 40. You start looking at what are we here on earth for? What's our purpose? What's our passion? And, Rick Warren wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Life. What are we here on earth for? Are we here to make things better for people? And that's what you pointed out with Stephen Jobs. He certainly did. I mean, I heard he practiced staring down people. He wouldn't wear shoes in the office. He'd play that one-upmanship. So I think you can still learn some stuff from these people, but I don't know if you could pattern your life after that unless you're a genius like him. Any other comments?
Did he surround himself with the right team?
Yeah, but it was a positional leadership thing. He intimidated the team. These guys were geniuses, and I think they subjugated themselves to his vision. That we'll see what happens as Apple moves forward. I'm sure there's some stuff coming out that is a direct reflection of Stephen Jobs' influence, but going out a couple years, we don't know, because one of the laws is the law of legacy. That your leadership is measured by who you leave behind. So we'll see.
Isn't that also, that was his leadership style, right?
Yeah.
It's all about consistency, it's about drive, it's about gumption, it's about living your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he did. It might not be the most acceptable type of leadership, but for him, it worked for him.
Yeah. But if you're going to play the...
Like he lost a lot, too.
Pardon?
Sounds like he lost a lot, though, too.
Yeah.
Depends on what's important.
He found himself in the same situation. He found his daughter was put up for adoption. She found herself in the same position that he was in. He tracked her down years later, tried to establish a relationship, but he was unmarried and put the kid up for adoption. And when you look back on life, it's going to be more the not the accumulations that you've got. That you're never going to hear somebody on their deathbed observing, "Wish I would have spent more time at the office." So just to wrap it up, law of solid ground. I was doing this with my son-in-law's team, and he started. So what happens in a mastermind group? You start trying to get examples from people in the room about solid ground, and usually it's a bad example of solid ground. And he said that when he first started out, he was a financial planner, stockbroker, and he had a client that was worth $18 million. It was obviously his biggest account. And he would ask Chris to take care of certain situations. Well, this guy was running on his expense account, he had escort services. And MasterCard says if you're not happy with the results, if you weren't pleased. So he called up my son-in-law. He says, Chris, I want you to call up MasterCard, and I want to get my money back on that escort service. I wasn't satisfied. So here's Chris just starting his business. It's his biggest client, and he knows the guy's married. And he said, I don't think I'm going to do that. He fired the client. Now, from a father-in-law perspective, to hear this coming out of my son-in-law was emotional to hear that. That I'm not going to have to worry about whether he's going to take care of my daughter or not. But that's the power of these masterminds, that the sharing that comes out of it, the insights, because people bring to the table different experiences. And you may not have a question, but you're going to hear a question asked or answered by somebody else that applies to you. So everybody should have one of these mastermind. Thanks, sir. This is an opportunity to participate in a mastermind. I'm starting March 23rd. And I do it, that's a Friday, and I do it from 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning so you can get to work. There's a level of confidence at these things. It's sort of like Las Vegas. What goes on here stays here, except when I'm talking about my son-in-law. Location is up on Military Trail, just a little bit north of Donald Ross. It's in my son-in-law's office building, and the cost for that is $200. There's only 10 seats available, and that comes out to about $20 a meeting. We start on time and we finish on time, so that, Faye, you're in my mastermind group. What did you get out of it?
It just gives a level of awareness about all these laws, and the confidentiality in the room is genuine, and Bill does a phenomenal job to facilitate, and it's a small enough group where we can share what needs to be shared relative to the subject he's talking about, and it's phenomenal. I've been to 2 of them. We're just about to close the second one, but this stuff is good stuff.
So you go from reading the book to owning the book. So the question I'll lead you with is, what are you doing to raise your lid? I want to thank everybody today for, I think everybody stayed awake this morning. That's good. We only lost one. So thank you. She's leading by example.
Yeah, I want to thank Bill and give him a big hand for. And as a thank you, I got you a book.
All right.
Another book.
All right. Now, I also do 4 other days of mastermind, so if Fridays don't work for you, did everybody get, make sure I get my cards out to everybody here. That would help, if you know who I am.